Donald, thanks for talking to me today, man. It's an honor to talk to you. I listened to you on Viva Fry last week, and I was like, I have to talk to this guy because you are aware of so many things that are happening in this country that I think have totally just completely gone over everyone's heads.
Well, thanks. I mean, we've been following each other on Twitter for a long time, and I've seen your work. I admire your work, but I think there's just so much going on now. So
Mhm.
many stories, and especially stories that the mainstream media just don't, they won't cover. They can't cover it. You know why they can't cover it. And so here we are. I like to say that I'm amazed the last few years the people I listen to are my fellow Canadians, and they're at their kitchen tables or standing in their backyard with an iPhone, and they just tell the truth as they see it. And
Mhm.
it's just a wonderful thing that's happening. So great to be on your show. Thank you. I'm amazed we haven't gotten together before because I say I've been following your work and I really admire what you do.
Oh, likewise, man. Thank you. I feel to be honest with you, knowing your story, I feel kind of like I'm in your shadow a little bit here. So
Oh,
um
please.
why don't you give our viewers a little bit of your backstory because it's a really fascinating story.
Well, it was fascinating at the time. Um, okay, I started off as a motorcycle cop, 21 years old in Toronto. And that was in 1975. And I did that for a few years. I had an accident. I got banged up in a motorcycle collision, so they sent me downtown. And all of a sudden, I found myself working wiretaps for over a year with the RCMP, with the security service, OPP, Toronto, all the squads. And it really opened up my eyes. I spent 15 years with the Toronto Police. At the end, I was a sergeant detective. And I was the staff investigator for the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police. I investigated all sorts of internal corruption. We were undercover for over a year pretending to be corrupt police officers. That was at 52 Division downtown. And that was about 1984, 85. That's an incredible story, only because, once again, how can a police officer, 10 years on the job, be so naive that certain things are happening? And yet they were. So that's an interesting story. For a year, we pretended to be corrupt police officers. We took bribes. We took trips. We hung out with the triads and other organized crime and other corrupt police officers who didn't know that we were not their corrupt buddies. At the end, we sadly had to end up doing search warrants, arresting our fellow police officers, sometimes at their home, in front of their children. Search warrant just had to be done. But that taught me an awful lot. And I've been working, fighting corruption ever since. Now, in 1990, I left the police force, Toronto Police. And I did that because I had to make a choice. I found myself with three children and no wife, and I do mean Mr. Mom. And you cannot run almost teenagers, three of them, while working night shift as
Right.
a police officer. So I went off and I founded a private investigation firm, licensed firm, and I had all sorts of people working for me. At one time, I had almost 20 employees. But I found myself um, drifting back into the same types of investigations that I did as a police officer, undercover against organized crime, deep cover. And when my children got a little older and they were on their own, I found myself traveling the world, pretending to be other people, becoming involved in major investigations, sometimes where the amount at stake was, well, for instance, in the latest one that just settled in Florida a couple of years ago, the amount at stake was 1 billion US dollars. It was an estate primarily centered around Barbados. And that case, we worked that for, I think, 15, 18 years. It ended in Florida with the largest civil RICO judgment in that state's history. I think it was some 263 million US dollars for the client. And there were over 1 million pages of exhibits, and that's the level that I used to work at. And by the way, I went to prison for 63 days.
Mm.
And that happened on that same case. In 2009, I was traveling in Asia. One of my companies had become involved in that lawsuit, which was centered in Barbados. And we tried to bring it to Canada because the people that were responsible for this massive fraud in Barbados, we were suing people like the Chief Justice, the Prime Minister. And look, it's a small island nation of under 300,000 people. When you sue the Chief Justice and the Prime Minister, even if you have the evidence, it goes nowhere. So we tried to bring it to Canada. Didn't work out. The Canadian court said the proper venue was not Canada. Turned out the proper venue was in Florida. And as I said, it worked out. But in 2009, I was traveling in Asia, and a court in Ontario, Canada, issued an order that I was to appear in this civil lawsuit for discovery. Nothing unusual about that, done all the time. And in fact, my company had paid several cost orders because in the Canadian courts, if you launch a motion and you lose, sometimes you have to pay the other side's legal fees, sometimes 5,000, sometimes 50,000, but whatever it was, my company paid it. So I was traveling in Asia, 2009. This judge issued an order that I was supposed to appear in Toronto at a deposition just to give evidence. No problem. But I wasn't there. The problem was the 3 corrupt Big Bay Street lawyers, who, by the way, are named on my website, donaldbest.ca. And so they told the court that they had served me personally with a summons to appear. Well, for questioning. Well, I wasn't even Canada. But I had phoned the court the previous day in Canada to see how much my company owed, if any, what was the decision. And I found out just the day before that this court order had been issued. So the next morning, I called and I spoke to the 3 corrupt lawyers. And I offered to answer questions. I wanted them to bring in a court reporter. They wouldn't bring in a court reporter. That's the first clue. And then after a half an hour, they wouldn't let me answer any more questions. And they insisted that I come in personally. I did not tell them that I was in Asia. I just said I couldn't make it. But, you know, these depositions are done by phone all the time. So they hung up. But I kept recording. I recorded the whole thing. And they failed to hang up properly. It was one of those old spider phones, you know, the group phones that sat on the table, looked like a little spaceship. They didn't hang it up, so I continued recording as they discussed how they were going to fabricate evidence and tell the judge a lie. They went out of that room, went to another room, got a court reporter, and made a statement for the record that I, A, admitted to having received the court order. I didn't. 12 times during that call, as proven by my recordings, I said, no, I didn't get it. Please send it to me. So they went out. They said I confessed to receiving it. They said I refused to be questioned. And basically, I told the judge where he could shove it. That was what they wrote in this paper. Then they had a secret hearing in the Canadian court in Ontario, and they told the judge all of that orally. I was not given notice of this hearing. It was secret. I wasn't invited. The judge convicted me of contempt of court, sentenced me to 3 months in prison. Well, when I heard that had been done, I thought, wow, these guys are in trouble. I'll just go back to Canada, show the recording, let the judge hear the recording. He'll set me free and put these corrupt lawyers in jail for perjury and obstruct justice, falsifying evidence. What do you think? What do you think? What do you think happened?
Yeah, you show up, you get arrested, and you get put in a can. I mean, that
What happened? That's exactly what happened. The judge did not reopen my conviction. He did not let any new evidence into the record. My recordings that showed everybody lied, didn't let them in. Excuse me. So he didn't let that new evidence into the record. And the lawyer that I had representing me, I had paid him $60,000. He walked. He said, "Oh, this is a civil case. I'm a criminal lawyer. Sorry." And he walked. Why? Because he didn't want to harm his fellow lawyers. Neither did the judge. So I was forced to represent myself. And I tried to find a lawyer. This was just before Christmas 2012. My lawyer left me. And the judge gave me 2 weeks over Christmas and Hanukkah to find a lawyer.
no kidding.
No kidding. 138 lawyers of the Ontario Bar refused to take my case. Some were very sorry. They said they felt ashamed, but their law firm wouldn't let them take the case.
So,
Because
sorry, let me jump in right here because
Yeah.
why are you being targeted like this? Like, I mean, it seems, in all honesty, like you're being completely set up in this scenario here.
there was $1 billion at stake, and these big Bay Street lawyers from the big Bay Street firms, as George Carlin said, it's a club, and you ain't in it. Later on, I found out that the judge was corrupt and involved himself, and I'll tell you about that. So, after a lifetime of fighting corruption, I ended up right in the middle of it. So, 138 lawyers wouldn't take my case. The Law Society of then Upper Canada, Law Society of Ontario, I asked them for help. They said, "Here's a list of lawyers, go fish."
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's a club. And they protect each other. And if you have ever made a complaint against a lawyer, not just in Ontario, anywhere in Canada, probably the United States too, they look after each other. And this is what happens when you have no independent oversight, no external accountability. The lawyers investigate themselves. It's set up that way. They investigate the same people they went to school with, the same people they party with, they work with, the same people they see at bar mitzvahs or christenings, the same people they see in court every day. They investigate each other. And it turns out exactly as you would imagine, just like when we allow the police to investigate each other.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what happened. So I ended up defending myself, self-representing, and did about as well as they intended me to, which is none of my new evidence was allowed in. No lawyer would help me. They were frightened too. And at the end of it, court ended, and I was resentenced, or shall we say, the warrant for my committal for 3 months in prison. It had been set aside for my trial, and now it was brought back. And the judge stood up, Justice J. Brian Shaughnessy, corrupt judge. The fact that I can say his name, and I've been saying it for a long time, along with the names of the lawyers, it's all on my website and everything, tells you something. So the judge stood up, he left, the court reporter left, defense lawyers laughed and walked out, or the prosecuting lawyers, plaintiffs, left, laughed, and walked out. And I was left, my legs were shackled. The police, the guards put handcuffs on me, shackled me, led me downstairs on my way to a 3-month prison stay. Well, when I was downstairs, the judge went to a back room. And without telling me, a self-represented litigant, without putting it in the court records, without making a note of it at all, he tore up that first warrant for my committal, and he doubled my sentence. That secret star chamber warrant for my committal that doubled my sentence was not placed into the court records. There was no note of it in the trial records. The only copy was sent to the prison with the body. That's me.
And so this essentially is your reward for investigating $1 billion fraud scheme
that we eventually won, but not in Ontario. So on my way to prison, they had to put me in a separate section of the prison car because as an ex-cop, I'm treated just like a child rapist. I'm dead from the moment I get into the general population. And they told me that. And there were threats to rape me. Everybody knew I was a cop. How they knew that, I don't know, except there must have been a channel from the guards to the prisoners. And from the time that I was put in that prison truck to take me to the prison in Lindsay, Ontario, all I heard was shouts that I would be raped, murdered. And when I got to the prison, all the prisoners knew that an ex-cop was coming. How is that possible? How did the entire prison know? No one knew I was coming until I was placed in handcuffs that day, but the entire prison knew. And the head of the prison there was there, the warden or the chief administrator, and he came over and he said, "Mr. Best, welcome. But I think we have to put you in what's called administrative segregation." It means solitary confinement.
Oh.
Because that's the only way we can keep you alive. And I agreed, because what else was I going to do? So I spent a total of 63 days in solitary confinement. I did find a lawyer once I was in there to bring to another judge what this corrupt judge has done. And the judge was appalled, the new judge, and he reduced my sentence to the original sentence. Let me tell you about solitary confinement. Now look, I'm a big guy. I'm stable. I have my faith. I have my family, friends. I'm a tough old ex-copper. But when I walked into that cell and I saw that it was covered with the blood and feces and tortured writings of hundreds of prisoners, and I heard what that's all about, it's torture. They shut that door and that light never went off for 63 days.
No.
It's torture. I mean, we leave the lights on. You know, the Nazis used to do this. Everybody does this. It's torture. And that's what it is. And my compatriots were an interesting bunch. Over every cell, there's a sign that says who and what they are. Biter, mouth guard, two guards and a white shirt. White shirt's the manager. and that's the only way they'll let that man out of his cell. And then other suicide risk, whatever they had. I watched men eat their own feces.
Oh,
I listened to them and watched under the door as they ran against that cell door. Must weigh 700 pounds, that cell door. And they would run against that 1,000 times. How do I know? I counted. There's not much else to do. And then they'd fall down, knock themselves out, get up and do it again. Now, I was a stable guy. Well, I think I still am. I mean, I survived. But I came out of there changed. Not that I was PTSD or anything like that, but with a real appreciation of how cruel humans can be to other humans. And I know these are the dregs of society. Half of them would probably kill you without even thinking about it. Many of them are mental because we've shut down our mental institutions. We did that back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. We shut down long-term care. We said we gave them community care, place them into the community for community care. They just end up in solitary, trying to hang themselves and eating feces. And that's happening now here in Canada. And I was only there for 63 days. There are other people who have been there for years. And that brings me to the Coutts, the 4 Coutts accused.
yeah.
And they have been in prison now, much of the time in solitary, for 600, and I think 38, 39 days, something like that.
Why are they being held in solitary?
Well, I did an article, once again, on my blog, donaldbest.ca. And if you just type Coutts in there, you'll see it. The denying bail to these 4 accused, and I'll go through it, and the evidence that we know is against them or that is purported to be against them. It's a political decision. The investigation was political, and look, back on February 14th, 2022, it was a Monday, that's when the Emergencies Act was invoked in Canada. The Prime Minister did that. But in order to do that, he didn't have enough evidence with just the bouncy castle protests and Songfest in Ottawa, because that's pretty well what it was.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody cleaned up the streets, fed the homeless, crime went down. Yeah, they honked the horns for a couple of days, but then they stopped. They partied, no alcohol, but there was a lot of dancing and a lot of speeches and a lot of happiness and some road hockey too, and bouncy castles. So that wasn't enough. So they needed something. And they needed something outside of Ottawa, even outside of Ontario. And they found that in the Coutts 4. Excuse me.
Yeah. So while you're getting into that, with the Coutts, so let's get into what was happening at the Coutts border crossing, because that's essentially the Coutts border crossing is the big border crossing in Alberta, between the United States and Canada, and it had been blockaded by a big group of people, just like the other border crossings, like in BC where I was at the time.
Right, but that's not even an accurate statement. The more accurate statement was, yes, they were protesting at the Coutts border, and there was always lanes open for emergency vehicles, ambulances, and such. It was actually the police who shut down the border crossing and the roads, not the truckers.
Okay.
So once again, it was feel good. It's very interesting. Coutts, small little town, and one of the restaurants that was there, perhaps the only one, they decided earlier on they wouldn't sell alcohol anymore, so no beer and anything like that. And this is because, well, in any group watching hockey at some big arena, there's always a couple of crazy ones,
Mhm.
and it's the same anywhere. So, people realize this. They're just good Canadians. So what happened was we saw an undercover operation by the RCMP to infiltrate this group of truckers and protesters and farmers and plumbers and electricians, because that's really all it was. And we saw them do an investigation, and we've heard about it, and I'll speak about how faulty that was an investigation was, and perhaps it was even directed. And we'll get into what that means, and how people gather evidence of guilt while ignoring evidence of innocence. It's done all the time by police officers, and in fact, it's resulted in numerous unjustified false executions of innocent people, especially in the United States, but I'm sure back in Canada if we look too. So there was this protest, and they needed the federal government needed this to invoke the Emergencies Act. So there was this investigation. We've heard evidence. All the politicians and the federal justice employees in Ottawa, they knew blow by blow what was going to happen with this investigation. So, excuse me. I hope you can edit that out.
Oh, we'll keep it. It makes you more human.
Oh, I'll be human a lot today. So, in any event, Canadians were told on the morning of Monday, the 14th, February 2022, a press conference was held. RCMP held it in Coutts, Alberta. And at that time, Canadians were told basically that a terrorist network, a group of terrorists, had been arrested at the Coutts border crossing with the protest. And we were told that not all of the players were known, but their operations were being directed from a sinister network of who knows who across Canada. And they showed a table of firearms. And what we were told were bulletproof vests and a machete. And they were all laid out on this table. And there was a police car in back, an RCMP patrol car. So you could know who were the wonderful who was a wonderful organization and police officers that did this, made this wonderful arrest and saved everyone. And that photo was used to justify the Emergencies Act. The photo was used to bring to the protesters who were down there, who were still there, and look, we've arrested all these people. Look at the weapons. And at that point, the protesters started leaving because they didn't want to be associated with any of this. And you can understand.
Mm-hmm.
So prior to the declaration of the Emergencies Act in the afternoon, the Coutts protest was disassembling. So why the Emergencies Act? Excuse me. We are going to have to cut some stuff out here.
That's okay. Well, while you're refilling your water there, I want to say, so I was actually paying very close attention because I, of course, was a Freedom Convoy supporter, and so I was up to date, paying attention. I was in BC at the time, so I was paying attention to what was happening at the Peace Arch border, the Coutts border in Alberta, and of course what was going on in Ottawa. And I saw that photo pop up, and my initial reaction was, well, what do you expect, right? It's southern Alberta. Like, people drive around with rifles in their vehicles. You know what I mean? Like, to metropolitan Canadians, it's funny because people in Vancouver and Toronto and Montreal seem to think that they're the only people who exist in this country. But there is a lot of country where people drive around with rifles in their trucks, just as part of, it's like having their registration in their glove box. So that was my initial reaction was, okay, they got this table full of firearms and other things, but this is, again, southern Alberta, small town Alberta. Like, you look through enough cars and you're gonna find some firearms. It's just the way it goes. So yeah, please
I
go ahead, Don.
Yeah, I get it. I looked at that and I said, terrorist organization,
Yeah.
all those firearms, they've got them now. They're looking for the ones, the leaders. Lock them up and throw away the key.
Mhm.
That's what I said.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I did. I said that.
So 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 okay, so is what these is being set up here at the Coutts border. Essentially, what you're alluding to is that it was what triggered, what gave Trudeau the precedent to invoke the Emergencies Act. Now, does that handwritten note from Chrystia Freeland that's been all over the internet, where it says we need to frame them as terrorists, or I can't remember, label them as terrorists or categorize them as terrorists. Does that come in? Does that play a part in this?
I haven't heard the note mentioned, but don't forget we haven't had any defense or any prosecution evidence to this time. What we have had are a couple of bail hearings where I understand, and I wasn't there, I understand that the judge basically said, I'm not even going to look at this. They're staying in jail. So everybody had this everybody had this perception that, once again, was media generated. It truly was government generated and reinforced by the government media. And look, I looked at it. I looked at everything. I said, throw away the key. How dare they spoil a wonderful, peaceful movement? I didn't know anything more than that photograph and what I was told.
Mhm.
They were charged with conspiracy to murder police officers.
And this was a result of the evidence that they collected while they were undercover, correct?
Yes, and other evidence. They were wiretapped too, and we'll get to that.
Okay.
And we'll get to how this whole thing was staged to present to the Canadian public, and I suppose the world, a bit of theater. Now, I do a show every morning. I'm co-host with Jason Levine on the Levine Show. It's 8 a.m. till 9 or 10 some mornings, Monday to Friday, and we talk about a lot of things, many subjects. But about day 490, Jason came to me with the story of these four Canadian men called the Coutts Four. And that's a misnomer, and I'll speak to that. I haven't spoken about that before, but I think we're going to do it on this show. But he came to me and he said, do you realize that these four guys never got bail? They've been in jail for 490 days. And I was blown away. My immediate thought was, wow, they must be real terrorists. There must be something wrong here.
Mhm.
Because, in Toronto, we have an alleged cop killer out on bail.
Mm.
First degree murder he's charged with of a police officer, and there's a dead body. And we buried that police officer. And this man is out on bail. I suppose he's got an ankle bracelet. I suppose he's got to stay home and watch reruns, but he's out. And is somebody who's out for attempted murder, murders someone or robs someone or beats someone. We are a nation that gives bail to everybody, no matter what.
Mhm.
Cop killers, alleged cop killers. So why aren't these men out on bail? And it was only then that I started looking into the plight of these four Canadians. And I have to say, I've looked at the evidence as best as I can. And don't forget, I'm a former police sergeant detective. All my life, I've been an investigator. I've carried the dead bodies of my friends. So, conclusion, fully justified, that everything about their case was politicized and was contrived theater. There are serious, serious problems with the evidence, and we'll get into that. But what I found was that the investigation, the arrest, the collection of evidence, the trial, or the presentation in court for bail hearings, and the denial of bail, that was all politically motivated and or influenced. Now, that's not the way things are supposed to be in this country,
Mm-hmm.
but it's the way things are for these four accused. Now, I haven't said their names, and I'm going to talk a little bit about each of them. And I don't know them. I've never spoken to them. I've spoken to family members and friends. I have not had the honor of being in court to hear it firsthand, and it's not broadcast. And indeed, there are several media bans and prohibitions where we can't talk about certain things that have happened or may not have happened. We're not allowed to talk about whether was a certain court decision about a certain thing that I can't talk about.
Right.
It's very strange.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very strange. Yeah. So the four men are Jerry Morin, Anthony Olenek, Christopher Carbert, and Christopher Lysek. And as far as I'm concerned, they are political prisoners in Canada. Now, they've been charged with these heinous offense, well, the conspiracy, heinous offense, conspiring to murder a police officer. Well, let's talk about how they got that evidence. We heard evidence that there were rumors about a large cache of 1,000 firearms or hundreds of firearms in the Alberta area, and that people were talking about some sort of rebellion. This all came out, I think, at the inquiry, and also it's come out. Oh, if you talk about HateGate, and you can put that hashtag in. What this was also to justify the declaring of the Emergencies Act. The federal government used intelligence that was gathered from, and I say intelligence very loosely, it was gathered from an anti-hate network that was federally funded.
Mm.
And now that whole thing has just been toppled because it turned out what they said was falsely to put forward a picture of a national redneck hate organization that spanned Canada. They said it was called Diagolon. Well, it turns out it was just a meme put out by a chap named Jerry McKenzie, down east, former military, and they presented that as an actual armed threat to Canada.
You know what? I just want to jump in here really quick
Go ahead.
because this is the part that drives me insane about this story. I think because Canada gets the runoff of American media and culture, we've always had this weird fascination with, racism and the Ku Klux Klan, and I wouldn't say fascination, almost like flirtation with, where we think that these people exist in our country because we absorb so much American media. But I'm telling you, those people, look, it's racism is everywhere. You're never going to escape it. Prejudice exists. I think prejudice is just a part of the human DNA. It's just part of us, right? And unfortunately, racism rears its ugly head in all corners of the world. But this idea that there's some network of some hate network made up of neo-Nazis and Ku Klux Klan, members, that does not exist in Canada at all whatsoever. Even in the United States, you will be hard pressed to find living active members of the KKK or any neo-Nazi groups.
They keep interviewing the same six suspects in the United States.
That's right.
That's it. That's it. And it's used to foment division. It's used to do all sorts of things. It's used to sell newspapers.
Right.
Okay, fine. But in Canada, this was all a lie. It was just a big lie. And that was thoroughly exposed by a Freedom of Information request by Jeremy McKenzie and his gang. Oh, wait a minute. No, his lawyers. you know, and
You mean it's his terror network?
yeah, his terror network.
That's
Their
right.
name is Carmia, I think. But anyway,
LLC.
yeah. So anyway, it turned out the whole thing, the invocation of the Emergencies Act, was a political desire. It was a wish that was fulfilled by thoroughly compromised intelligence and police agencies, delivered to the government exactly what the government wanted. And you know what? Wasn't that the story of 3 years of lockdowns?
Yeah.
Where we had policing agencies, we had chiefs of police, for heaven's sake, kneeling with illegal Black Lives Matter marchers in Toronto, Ottawa, I think in Edmonton, Calgary, and Vancouver. And of course, the COVID regulations were in place. You couldn't gather more than 6 or whatever it was. But the police came out, met with these BLM marchers, and knelt with them, breaking the law with them. Mm-hmm. And then when they tore statues down and defaced public buildings, the police looked the other way.
Yeah, well, it's a result of ideological rot. And I just want to comment. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Donald. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, but let Adamson barbecue sandwiches try and sell barbecued sandwiches to a bunch of customers when his shop was supposed to be closed according to the regulations, but Costco was open just a block that way, and Walmart was open just a block that way. No, this was targeted on small business. And you know what they sent in? The mounted unit, the Toronto Police mounted unit, to trample the good people just waiting to buy a barbecue sandwich. But they knelt with Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, the thing that confused me with the Black Lives Matter thing was and it's, man, that issue in itself is a tough one to dissect, because it's just another component of this cultural revolution that we're experiencing right now. And the Black Lives Matter in name, the name itself suggests something that it's not. And like, for myself personally, I support what the name infers. Black lives do matter, and there are times throughout history where they haven't mattered. But what confused me about BLM showing up in Canada was that we do not have the same problems that they do in the United States. And again, it's a result of American cultural runoff that we are always subject to. We were the end of the Underground Railroad. Now, again, it's not to say that that racism doesn't exist here, because it does, but not to the racial tensions are don't exist to the extent that they exist in the United States. So when I just need to kind of give a little bit of a deeper story here for the people listening, because we do have a lot of American listeners. The racial tensions that exist in our country are typically between the rural communities and the First Nations communities, or the Indigenous communities, of which I am a part. I'm Métis, right? And I wrote a piece about this on Twitter. But the reason why those tensions exist has a lot to do with what's going on in the Indigenous communities and the runoff seeping into the communities around it. But I just wanted to say that because the Black Lives Matter phenomenon as it touched Canada did not make any sense whatsoever. And people like myself, people like Donald, we were all just kind of sitting there like, what is going on here? And you're right. The police, looking the other way while statues are taken down, while monuments are defaced, while, businesses are literally burning to the ground. It puzzled everybody up here, because we're like, this isn't our, first of all, this isn't our issue. But second of all, like, what, it just, there's a hard ideological slant, and it's top down, right? The ideological rot. It's the same in the United States. It's the same in all Western countries right
It's
now.
profitable, though. It's very profitable.
There you go. And
And
so
that's it.
it comes down from our federal government. And so people are almost brainwashed or trained into thinking that as long as you are ideologically correct, or in line with the I keep using the word ideology, but the ideological belief.
The ideology that's approved of the day, the narrative.
Exactly.
Yes,
As long
you
as
don't
you're in
have to
line with
obey the law.
exactly. As long as you're in line with the narrative, you could do whatever you want. And that's essentially what's been going on here for the last, 5 or 6 years.
Oh, it's been going on longer than that.
Right.
It's called the rule of law, and it is dead in Canada. Now, some of the people who are listening probably don't know what rule of law means. And sorry, I'm so happy you're here, but I wish you'd have paid more attention to this stuff because it matters. So, rule of law is a principle that goes back to Peelian principles, how we established our police, and it goes further back than that, but in the mid 1800s, it used to be that policing was owned by the corporations, by the politicians, and still that way in many countries today, where police have to get permission in India from their staff sergeant to be able to investigate that business or that person over there. You have to find out if he's politically protected or not first before you're allowed to do that. Well, we don't do that here, at least we didn't. Rule of law means that the law is applied equally to all. Rich, poor, black, white, one legs, two legs, men, women. Rule of law means it's applied equally. Well, that concept is dead and gone in Canada. When we have our law enforcement officers choosing to support political movements, social movements, politics, politicians, one side over the other. And that's exactly what they did when they supported Black Lives Matter. And it's exactly what they've been doing for a long time. We had a terrible massacre in Nova Scotia. I think one of the worst mass murders in Canadian history, where the man dressed as an RCMP officer and went out and killed RCMP officers and at least one and people. And he was finally taken down. And so there's a homicide investigation going on. One of the largest ones we've ever seen in Canada, I am sure. And it's early days, and we don't know where the weapons came from, where the car came from. Did he have people support it? We didn't know anything. But the commissioner of the RCMP, Brenda Lucki, held a meeting with those homicide investigators and told them that she wanted the release of the types of firearms to further the political agenda of the Liberal government. Now, fortunately, one of these officers recorded her. And that was the end of that. But we had, let's step back and look at what we had here. We had the top law enforcement officer of our National Police Service willing to compromise an ongoing initial stages homicide investigation to further a political agenda. I'm glad she's gone. She had no integrity. She was unworthy of the post. Just that proved it.
So on that note, let's travel back to this Diagolon situation. So we have these men who are accused of being part of a national terror network, charged with conspiring to murder a police officer. We have a table of machetes and firearms and bulletproof vests that are presented as evidence. Um, what comes next in this situation? Now we're at the Diagolon point. So where do we go from there?
All right. So how did we get, let's go back to what happened, how they were arrested, the police investigation, because I think that's very important. They sent in two female RCMP undercover officers. I've seen the photo of one, and they're pretty good looking girls. And
Mhm.
they were picked for that reason. We used to, when we went in undercover, pretending we were corrupt police officers, we had to bring our own prostitutes, our own squad groupies, because uh, the organized crime was offering us women, and we could take the booze and the meals and the vacations and the $100,000 in the briefcase, but we couldn't take the women. Of course, we couldn't. So we brought our own and pretended they were our girlfriends that we passed around within the squad. Apparently, that was quite common with police officers, according to these members of organized crime that we hung out with. We were the same as everybody. How about that?
Mm.
But something magic happened when we brought along the women. They were good looking women, and they'd give a wink and a smile to some member of organized crime that you're having dinner with, and all of a sudden he trusted you. She couldn't possibly be an undercover police officer. And once in a while, one of them might reach under the table and rub his leg a bit or even give him a squeeze. You think they don't do that? Of course they do. And we loved our fellow officers because that opened everything up. Nothing else was done, but yeah, I'm sure under the table they gave a guy a squeeze.
Mhm.
And that just let him know that we were as corrupt as he was.
Mhm.
So these girls went in there. Big red flag here. None of them were wearing recording devices. I think we've pretty well seen the evidence of that now. None of them were wearing recording devices. Now, in 1984, when we went undercover, the recording devices were the size of a paperback.
Hmm.
They weighed 2 pounds. You had to shave your leg and you'd strap it to your crotch with medical tape. It was a reel to reel tape recorder called a Nagra. And then they'd lead the microphone up through your underwear, shave your chest, and they tape it right in the middle of your chest, the microphone. And you'd go in wearing 3 pounds of equipment. So everybody, when they met anybody, a new person at a meeting, you'd all grab each other's crotch. Yeah, men grabbing each other's crotch. Everybody knew the reason. That, that's what it is. But what about today? Well, here's my favorite undercover recording device. It's an Apple Watch.
Right. Right.
Everybody's got them. Nobody knows. The microphone is so good. I have some other things. Oh yes, here's my long-term favorite. This one has been with me for almost 20 years. It's an MP3 player. Plays the blues all day.
Hmm.
It's a great little device. And I put it right in my pocket and nobody sees it, nobody knows. And if they do discover it, it'll sing them the blues.
Right.
All the while recording.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I mean, everybody carries a smartphone nowadays. They could literally have just turned the microphone on and recorded on their phone and nobody would
Sure.
have even known. Yeah.
They have them in earrings. They have them in pens. I had a collection here. I think I took it away. Yeah, they have them in pens. They have video cameras in pens. You
Mhm.
won't see it. Video
Mhm.
cameras in watches and earrings.
Mhm.
So there's no reason for anyone to not record. In the old days, we go in naked. That is no recording, because if you were caught, the jig would be up or they'd hurt you,
Right.
and the technology just wasn't any good. And so, but today that's not so. But the thing about going in without a recording device is you can make them say whatever you want them to say, if that's who you are. But even by mistake, now we've been talking here, how long?
About an hour. Yeah.
About an hour. So about 20 minutes ago, I started a sentence with the words, "As you know." Do you remember that sentence?
Uh, kind of, not totally,
Really?
no.
What
I
what
mean,
was what were we talking about? You can't. I
no.
can't even remember what you said in a sentence 5 minutes ago, and
Right,
neither can anyone else here without rewinding.
right, right,
So when you would go in naked without the recorder, you would always try and have a small memo book and a pencil or maybe a piece of paper. But even that was suspect sometimes. So you'd have like a golfing pencil and you'd go in the washroom and you'd write it on toilet paper
right.
and you'd stuff that in your sock. That's how we were able to remember the quotes that these people said. You didn't go into a situation and then 8 hours later or 2 days later come out and say, at this time they said that. But that's what happened with these two RCMP officers. And when they came out, uh, warrants for the arrest of these men were obtained. Search warrants were obtained for 3 trailer homes that were at the place and some outbuildings, I understand. And the police came in, arrested these men, 4 of them. There were many others arrested, but these are the 4 that remain in jail, and seized this photograph that we see of all these rifles, every one of which is a legal hunting rifle at the time. It's just Alberta.
Yeah, that's
I
yeah.
mean, look, where I live right now, if I look out in the backyard or down the street, there could be a bear. And that's why everybody in this community carries bear spray.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter if you're just walking from the door to your car or to your truck, you carry bear spray. And believe you me, you look around in the spring, especially because they're very cranky and they'll come right up to your garbage, and you could be faced taking out the garbage and you're faced with a bear or worse, a
Mhm.
mom and her 2 cubs, and then you're in trouble.
Yeah.
So everybody carries bear spray here. Well, out in Alberta, they also carry rifles because if you're a cattle rancher, you got gophers and all the rest of that.
Well, that's it.
It's normal.
I'm in the Calgary area. I'm pretty much in the city. I could guarantee you I could walk out into traffic right now at a red light, look through every single car in that line of cars and probably find at least 2 firearms. I mean, this is the again, going back to what I said about metropolitan Canadians. They don't understand what life is like on the other side. My grandparents owned a farm in Alder Flats, which is in, just outside of Edmonton for decades. You couldn't exist on that plot of land without firearms. I mean, my grandparents would have been dead the first year they were out there without firearms. There is stuff that will kill you out there if you are outside without a firearm. It's just the way it goes. So that, going back to what I originally said, when they presented that evidence, I thought, well, yeah, it's Alberta. Like, what do you expect? What do you think you're going to find?
Well, I didn't think that at first. I thought terrorism. I believe these police officers. But then when I came back to it, when my partner in crime, Jason Levine, told me, I looked at the photos and I looked at the articles and the press release, watched the videos, and what I saw was these firearms, these rifles, and everything else on this table was presented as political theater,
Hmm.
where politics took over and surpassed the need to preserve evidence. Why do I say that? Well, I've been working with evidence all my life. And what we had was every one of the firearms are not bagged. They've been transported from somewhere without protection for fingerprints, without protection for DNA examination, forensic examination, and more important, without protecting them from cross contamination for DNA examination. Because don't forget, they told us we're looking for a national network of terrorists in Canada. And if they were serious about that, they would have been examining each one of these exhibits for forensic evidence leading to who brought them, where they were, who had touched them, who, what fingerprints were on them. I mean, we're looking for a national terror network here, aren't we? No, we really weren't. So it was okay that the staged PR photo was far more important than professional evidence handling and an ongoing investigation. And
Mhm.
that's exactly what we had. And so the investigation was compromised and suspect right from the start with no recordings. Look, the four decent guys, they've got 7 children between them, number of elderly parents, a couple of businesses, I think with 7 and 10 employees, award-winning landscaping business. 2 of them knew each other since childhood, I've been told, but the other 2 were unknown to each other and unknown to the pair who knew each other. So we're asked to believe that they were secret members of this Diagolon terrorist network
Mhm.
and that they met for the first time at the Coutts protest. And they were sitting there with their coffees. And one of them said, "Glad to meet you. Glad to meet you, Chris. I got an idea. Let's murder some police officers.
Yeah.
Let's do it here. I know it's a suicide attack, and we're surrounded by 100 armed police officers, but let's do it." And the other guys would have said, "I think that's a fine idea, Jerry. Let's murder these police officers." That's what they want us to believe. We used to have a saying in the police: if you've got nothing, charge conspiracy.
Hmm. Yeah.
Because conspiracy, the acts of one person, however innocent or guilty, can be used against the others in proving the common intent. So, in other words, if there's a plot to murder someone and you supplied the car that was the getaway vehicle 2 weeks earlier, you're guilty of murder too.
Mhm.
You're guilty of this conspiracy. They have to prove it, but it's a nice, easier charge. Excuse me. A much easier charge in some ways to arrest for. Proving it, that's another thing. So they're charged with conspiracy. There's a few other little charges there too. Not quite sure what they are, but they're very minor. I think someone is alleged. Oh yes, one of the guys is alleged to have had a pipe bomb. Ooh, back at
Yeah.
his farm. Back at his farm. Wow.
Yeah,
Wait a
and
minute. Don't we use those for shoving them down gopher
for
holes?
holes, that's exactly it. That's what
Isn't that
exactly what I was gonna
exactly
say.
what it's used for? Sometimes
That's
we use
right.
propane.
Yes.
There's all sorts of techniques.
Tennis
Yeah.
ball bombs. Yeah, I've
Yeah.
seen all sorts of different things being used.
And
Yeah.
then we had 2 other pieces of evidence that I uncovered that are just brutal, just brutal. One of the men was at the Coutts protest and he was arrested for threatening a police officer. That's another one of the charges. And once again, I wasn't in court when this evidence was heard, but someone told me he was there, and I believe it, that the police officer said that this accused said to him, "I'm going to take your gun." Well, let me tell you something. If I'm a police officer and I'm armed, and somebody says to me, "I'm going to take your gun,"
They're
I
dead.
believe that person.
That's right.
And that's a threat, and I'll take him down.
Yeah.
I lost a friend shot through the heart with his own gun, Harry
Mhm.
Snedden,
Mhm.
September of 1978. So someone says to me they're going to take my gun, they're done.
Mhm.
Except there was a video camera going, my friend. And he didn't say that. He said, "Wow, that's a nice gun. I wish I could afford one." Words to that effect.
Right.
But that's not what was testified to in court, so I understand. I stand to be corrected, but nobody's corrected me since, and that's what I believe happened. The other thing that happened was everybody's being followed, and all the phones are tapped. So one of the accused, he's He's 100 miles away, 200 miles away, and he gets a call that someone has a problem. They would like an electrical repair or installation in a farm. And he says, okay, I'll come and do it. And he puts his tools in his truck and he drives towards the farm. And thereafter, he's arrested, surrounded, handcuffed, the whole works. And they knew he was going to the farm. But when that press release came out from the RCMP said he was on his way back to Coutts. It was theater.
Yeah.
It was all theater.
So, yeah, I mean, all of this evidence is just, I mean, it's circumstantial at best, right? And I mean, it's coercion at the very worst, because we don't know what these undercover female officers said to these guys to try to get them to. I mean, I have to. I mean, I have to believe that the objective was clear when they went in there, that they had to get these guys to say something that would
Anything.
give Trudeau precedence to invoke the Emergencies Act, right? And so, you know, myself, I was in BC at the time. I'm in Alberta now, during the Freedom Convoy, and you know, I was a donor. I was writing at the time, and I had people reaching out to me. I'd spoken to people who were in Ottawa, and it seemed to me that during that protest, that that it was pretty clear to operate well within the law. Don't do anything stupid. That was the message that was heard by, I think, most people. Now, in any large group of people, you get a few dummies. That's just going to happen, right? But in this case, this seemed like the first situation where we had, I mean, it was the largest ever civil rights movement in the history of our country, but it seemed like this was a rare scenario where everybody understood to operate well within the boundaries of the law. Now, I find it difficult to believe that these four men at the protest at Coutts border did not get that message nor understand what was at stake and how they were expected to behave.
Not only that, we're asked to believe far more than that, that they were planning a suicide mission. What would amount to a suicide
For
mission
what
to
purpose?
murder police officers? Well, to take over the government of Canada, of course.
In Alberta? Like that's crazy to me. You know what I
Don't
mean?
complicate things with evidence, okay, and
Right.
facts.
Right. But
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying, right? It's like, you know, so what and this is an argument I hear online a lot whenever the Freedom Convoy is brought up, that this was a attempted coup, that this, and to me it's like,
Ah,
when I hear that from people, I'm like, you clearly don't know history, because if you've ever seen a coup in your life, trust me when I tell you, this was not one. This was a
bouncy
bunch.
castles are not the armament. Thanks, Jason.
I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, you even take the bouncy castles and the street hockey out of the picture. This was a bunch of people fed up with being beaten and ground to a pulp by authoritarian mandates that we had lived under for 3 years that made zero sense and that were clearly political in nature. That's what was happening here. Now, I would say, I don't know if anybody even knows how much of our country was in support of the Freedom Convoy, but at the time, I was in British Columbia, which is as far left as you can get in our country. It's basically Canada's California. And most of the people that I observed were supporters of the convoy, if not financially, in spirit. They were in spirit. So it was a
Yep.
civil rights movement that most of our country was behind. And Trudeau needed to invoke the Emergencies Act and needed to crush it because it was growing day by day by day by day. So they needed to get something on somebody that would allude to there being some sort of coup or some sort of insurrection on its way. And obviously that's what these four guys were set up for. Now, let's move forward a little bit here. These four guys are arrested on obviously trumped up charges. They're arrested on conspiracy. What happens to them then? Are they still currently sitting in pretrial custody?
They are. Bail was denied for each one of them. As I say, even this country where we put gangbangers out, where we put cop killers out, Pompeo.
where we give $10 million to people who were known members of terrorist factions in the Middle East and shoot American soldiers. Let's put that out
Who
there.
murdered our allies. Yes,
That's right.
absolutely. Yes, yes, we do that. Okay. And of course, our Prime Minister Blackface, he declared that the convoy was made up of redneck, racist, misogynists. And I think it's my favorite photo from the convoy. It's a Sikh, and he's holding a sign, redneck,
Right, right, right. Right,
you know, just wild,
right.
just wild. And why did we all come together? We came together because we had seen 3 years of selective businesses destroyed,
Mhm.
just the little ones, not the big ones.
Right.
Churches shut down. We saw them drag pastors out of churches and make them kneel in the middle of highways with firearms pointing at them for praying in public.
Right.
And yet, if they'd had that prayer in Walmart just down the street, would have been legal because everybody knows that the virus doesn't touch you at Walmart only when you're in the church. Everybody knows that. That's
Everybody knows.
science.
That's right.
That's right. And don't talk about whether these drugs were experimental or not. And don't talk about the fact that jobs and homes and lives and families were destroyed. And we're not even going to go to the piles of injured and dead
Mhm,
that can no longer be ignored.
mhm.
But that's what Canadians were faced with
Right.
after 3 years of that. And we knew it was just political.
Mhm.
You know, when you could sit down and the virus wouldn't touch you, but the minute in a restaurant you had to get up and go to the washroom, you had to put that mask on because then the virus would get you. And we had 16-year-olds manning the door of every McDonald's
Right.
asking for personal medical
Medical inf
information, or these little Nazis wouldn't let you in.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I know.
wasn't it so easy? Didn't didn't we turn on each other so quickly?
Well, yeah, and and again, I think the convoy was a massive response to that because I think
Yep.
that there was a movement or a large chunk of our population who are critical thinkers who saw. I mean, it didn't take much. You don't got to be a genius to figure out what was going on, right? And you just had to have the courage to speak out. And I think what the convoy was all of that courage kind of poured in and funneled in through one channel, and that's essentially what gave rise to that. And so we have these four young men who are basically being made the patsies for the invocation of the Emergencies Act, right? I mean, that's essentially what we're looking at here. Where are they currently being held in pretrial?
They're being held everywhere. And let's not forget to remember, or, let's not forget here that pretrial prison is much different than real prison.
Mhm.
In pretrial, you don't have the services. I mean, you hear some of these accused, they've been talking, and they've been in there for so long that their fellow compatriot criminals will get out, get released, serve their sentence, come back in because they've been arrested again. There are people who have been there 3 and 4 times while these accused are still waiting for their trial. And what we've seen is a strategic um, movement on the part of the Crown to withhold critical evidence from the defense. And we have seen that, and this is quite normal. We're seeing it in the Detective Helen Gruss case. We're seeing it in the trial of Tamara Leach and Chris Barber in Ottawa. It's just so natural now that they do everything they can, the Crown, the prosecutor, and the police, to withhold evidence of innocence, exculpatory evidence. They withhold that. They lie about it. They destroy it. They
Mhm.
don't collect it. They fail to see it because somehow our law enforcement and prosecutors, the Crowns, have gone from justice to conviction at any cost, even if you have to lie about it, even if you have to falsely say, that man said he was going to take my gun. Even if you have to falsely say that one of the Coutts accused was on his way to Coutts when he was on his way to a barn to put in an electrical assembly, and they knew that, but they
Mm-hmm.
lied about it.
Mm-hmm.
Anything for a conviction. Toronto Star, here we go. The newspapers. Remember the headline? Let the unvaccinated die.
I remember that. Yes.
Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Hmm? Canada's, or Ontario's premier newspaper. Let the unvaccinated die. Don't give them any beds. That's what they did to us. That's what
Oh,
that is what the government funded media did to us. And I'm not even talking about CBC, who were the worst, except
mhm.
no, all the others. When they could see that they were going to get millions of dollars in both cash grants and government advertising, they did as they were told.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Well, that's a big Look, that's the number one problem that you have when
Yep.
your media is relying on your government for funding, right? I mean, it's like anybody who's no matter what media outlet you are, you're never going to speak critically of your sponsors. So when your government is your sponsor, that's a huge conflict of interest because as the media, your only job is to really talk about what's happening within your own country, and politics is a huge part of that. And so I mean, we're past the point of trusting Toronto Star or CBC. I mean, their audience is shrinking, year over year. I mean, it's basically nothing at this point because most people, even average everyday people who aren't, in the thick of it like you and I are, they're aware of what's going on here. They're aware they were lied to. You look at the COVID booster uptake. It's Pfizer in their last financial reporting, they've lost billions of dollars because the jig is up, right? We know
Yep.
we figured you out. We know what's going on now. And so, with these four young men, and this is why I wanted to talk to you today, because I don't know where, like, well, obviously I do know where the mainstream media is on this, but I was surprised at how little I actually knew. And it wasn't until I listened to you that I was like, whoa, like this is way bigger than I thought it was. My initial impression was that this was four guys who were set up in order to break up the Coutts, in order to break up the Coutts border protest. Now they're just kind of being put through the ringer through our justice system, because the Canadian justice system is pretty notorious for being I don't even know, just a complete loop of fuckery. And so that's what I figured was going on with these guys. I had no idea that their charges, their conspiracy charges, were essentially the prerequisite for Justin Trudeau invoking the Emergencies Act. I never made that connection. I didn't know there was a connection there.
They could not, the government could have not. They just simply couldn't have invoked the Emergencies Act. They desperately needed Coutts. They needed the narrative that there was a terrorist organization. They needed it. So they got it. And now these four men sit rotting in prison. And I'd like to go someplace here, Jason, if it's okay with you. Hey, it's
Please
your
do.
show.
Please do.
All right. Everybody talks about the Coutts Four. And that's a real misnomer. And there's real legal implications when we fail to realize that each one of these men is a different accused. And this is important. You see, if you're charged with conspiracy, the act of one, something you said, is used against everyone else. Something that he did or said, whether drunk and bragging to someone, some pretty girl that he met, who happened to be an undercover officer, that's used as evidence against you. So there are some other different charges laid, the threatening and the pipe bomb and such. And so each accused played a certain role in the creation of this whole. Now, once again, I'm saying they're all set up. I'm giving them more than, well, I'm giving them, I'd say the benefit of the doubt, but I don't have much doubt here. We know what happened. But nonetheless, some are charged with doing this, some are charged with saying that, some are charged with driving a vehicle here, some are supposed to have taken a bag of guns that was never proven to exist, as far as I know, and they were supposed to have done that. So if you're an accused and you haven't met some of these other accused, you're supposed to have a lawyer, your own lawyer, and your lawyer, while being well aware of what's happening with everybody else and the implications of a conspiracy and such, your lawyer's supposed to look after you first. Isn't that correct?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. If you were, if you were someone, look, let's just say, for instance, these four guys were charged with conspiracy to traffic drugs. Let's take them away from the Coutts situation, okay? And there's 10 people charged with conspiracy to traffic drugs. And 9 of them are really totally guilty. Let's suppose that. But you got invited to a barbecue one day, not knowing that the big shipment was going to be traded on that day in that backyard by that barbecue. I had a case like this, by the way. So you're charged with the conspiracy too. But you were just there for a beer and a hamburger. You walked from across the street,
Yeah.
but you're still charged. Do you see what I'm getting at here?
Mm-hmm.
So when we say the Coutts Four, that removes them as individuals, each having their own family, their own loves, their own desires, their own temperament. Um, and it does an injustice to them. Maybe it even does an injustice to them in fundraising. Maybe it does. So this term, the Coutts Four, is useful in some ways to Canadians because it reminds us that they are all together and they're being persecuted, and this is being done to them. But it also removes their individuality.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that individuality that will maybe prove that they're innocent. I hope I'm explaining this correctly because they're supposed to be a terrorist group. And we always speak of them as being a group, but they're not. 2 of the guys were schoolyard buddies. The other 2 had never met anybody. We got an electrician, we got a farmer, we got a truck driver. Somebody's a landscaper. I'm probably mixing up some of them, but in any event, they're just a bunch of ordinary citizens. Nobody had a criminal record. One guy, I think, had gotten into a fight as a juvenile or very young adult, 16, 17 years old.
Right.
Maybe broken somebody's nose. I'm making that up. I don't even know what he did. Okay. 20 years ago. So everybody's got family responsibilities, old folks, children, businesses, jobs, houses, mortgages. And they're telling us that these folks were going to overthrow the government by launching a suicide attack, murder police officers at Coutts. I don't buy it. And especially now that we've seen in the cold hindsight of the past year how it was an entire setup with the intelligence, how the RCMP tried to manipulate that murder investigation down east. Now, you know what? When the RCMP down east were told to release the types of firearms, they didn't. They told the commissioner no. Good for them. What strength, what integrity. But in Coutts, the RCMP compromised their entire investigation, their ongoing investigation, by releasing that photo. Because now if I have supplied one of those firearms because I'm one of these terrorists that are directing this thing from far away, I know I'm in trouble now because there's my firearm or one that I gave. Maybe my fingerprints are on it. You see why you
Hmm.
don't release photos of the firearms?
Hmm.
Unless you're trying to give ammunition to the government to shut down the whole country, seize bank accounts, destroy lives, jobs, and eliminate the political opposition and the unity of Canadians, which is what was really so threatening to Mr. Blackface.
Yeah, that I mean, look, that was probably the first and only time in my life where I experienced a period where the entire country seemed to be on the same page. We have a reputation for being fairly docile and apathetic, but when you put Canadians in a corner, the Freedom Convoy was the result. And this is what I've said for a very long time, and I want to be careful in saying it, but that spirit that drove the Freedom Convoy isn't gone. It's still alive. In fact, I think that flame is burning even brighter today than it was then. And the mistake that I think our federal government made was in thinking that they could crush it. And the thing that I fear is that we're going to be put in that corner again. But the next time, the people who go down there are going to know the tactics. They're going to know that their bank accounts are going to be taken from them. They know their assets are going to be seized. They know that they're going to, meet the blunt end of a baton from some, police officer in riot gear. And the story is not going to be a peaceful one. It's not going to be the same as what we saw before. And that's what I'm actually afraid of. I'm afraid of a real revolution because I don't think people understand what they entail. And that's all of these provocations are what lead to that sort of scenario. And that's why I'm talking about it today, because you have these four men who, again, have been charged with conspiracy, who were apparently supposed to go on a suicide mission, kill a police officer that would trigger another series of events along their, terror network chain that would lead to an insurrection. I guess that's the general idea of.
Well, that was the narrative that the government imposed on them.
Right, right. That's the
Right.
narrative. We know that's not true. We know that's a pie in the sky fantasy. But the thing that I get concerned about is that, well, some people have the attitude of, well, if that's going to be the narrative, then why don't we just do that next time? And that's my real fear.
I'm a little more optimistic than you are. Look,
Yeah.
I understand where you're coming from. But I don't think, well, first of all, some people tried to have another convoy and it failed. I
Yeah.
think it failed. I mean, they're down there, they're doing their things, and they're doing some good things, but it's like trying to recreate Woodstock for my generation.
Hmm.
There was only one Woodstock.
Right.
It came together, the rains, the overflowing toilets, the bands that were there. It was just this thing that happened, and they've tried to recreate it again and again and again. But it was so organic that it's just useless to try and recreate it.
Yeah.
I think the convoy, that cross country movement that we saw, I think that's like that. If we try and recreate that, I don't think we're going to do it, but that flame is burning and it's going to show itself in different ways. Now, let's go back to banks. First of all, if you know anybody who worked in a bank, when the government sees those 200 or 300 bank accounts across the country, and don't forget, they weren't just seizing bank accounts, they were destroying businesses, homes, lives,
Hmm.
families. People to this day can't get a mortgage.
Hmm.
Okay, they're having to go to special places. There's a network set up. And so they knew. But if you know someone who worked in a bank, you know what happened. You know that there were lineups of people saying, I'll take my $30,000, thank you, in cash. And that it was so bad that the banks had to get together and have a little meeting. And they shipped cash everywhere. And some banks, like in towns like Cochrane and Thunder Bay, were forced to start limiting cash, and that bank fire, that
That's
backfired on them.
a good
That
term
bank
for it.
fired on them all right too.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure, but I suspect that if the amounts on deposit were looked at today in various banks, you'd find that many Canadians have an envelope of five or $10,000 under their bed or in their doghouse. Some maybe even more.
Me. Yeah.
And oh, what's your address?
No, I was gonna say, just to interject, I was one of those people. I drove around for 3 days
Yeah,
pulling my money out of bank accounts and ATMs and stuff because
yeah.
I donated to the convoy. My name was on the list. I was terrified that everything was going to be taken from me by my government. And just to be clear, there are a lot of people out there that I heard go, good, good, they deserve it. No, 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 no. Sorry, if you live in a free and democratic society, that is something that should never, ever, ever happen to you, no matter what your belief and no matter what your political position, ever should never happen.
But Jason, they overplayed their hand, didn't they?
Yeah, they
The
did.
government overplayed their hand, and we saw exactly what awaits us with the central bank digital currency.
That's right.
We saw exactly what awaits us if you challenge this government. We saw that. And that goes back to the headline too in the Toronto Star, let them die.
Mhm.
That's all part of the same control. It's all part of the same coup that our own government was pulling on us to destroy our rights, to destroy our families, our businesses. Oh yeah, but they ship money to the big people, all their friends. Andy Lee, God bless her, she's doing a great investigations right now. I
Yes, she
don't know
is.
if you've seen it. This is incredible. Um, she has discovered that a certain IT company got $100 million a year in
Mhm.
federal government contracts, and she can't find their office.
Yeah, they've
She's
searched
gone
like
from empty building to empty building. Yeah.
I think one of them was a food court or something. It's pretty wild. I mean, yeah, so just to cap it off here because I want to get like a where are we at with this Coutts 4 case to
Okay.
date? And just briefly, can you tell me how they connected the four men together? Like how did they make the connection to the four?
The answer is we don't know the evidence. The defense team probably knows some of the evidence. There's a publication ban on a lot of things that I would like to tell you right now, but I can't do it. It's incredible. We're not allowed to talk about what people hear in court every day.
That's insane.
No, there's a purpose, isn't there? Now,
Yeah.
the purported purpose is so we don't pollute the jury pool. And I agree with that. But these are guys who have been in jail for over a year, coming up on 2 years, 640 days almost. And the newspapers haven't mentioned their names.
At all. At all. And
Look
and
it
I'll
up.
and I'll be honest with you, I the only place that I've really been able to get any of this information is yourself and Viva Fry. Like that's the only place I'm really hearing anything about this, which is
Rebel
crazy.
News, True North, there's all sorts of places like that, but you don't read about it in the Globe and Mail.
No,
No,
no.
no. Or CBC.
Not even the National Post. I've barely seen anything on the National Post, and I find them to be fairly accurate and fairly balanced. Nothing. Radio silence.
No. They're just doing as they're told. There's an agenda. They don't want Canadians to get all upset that these men are there. Now, why are they doing this? You know, I really believe that there is a total lack of evidence. I'll get on to something Ezra Levant said. He covered one of the hearings the other day, but I believe that they won't be able to make this case. There's a theory that says that the Crown is delaying so that it will be delayed past the point where the courts will set them free because they haven't had a trial in time. And then the Crown will be able to say, well, they got lucky, instead of having to show that there was no evidence at all and the officers lied.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I mean, it seems like basically they're just trying to run out the clock on these guys and just torture them until it's
Mhm.
done. You know, it's kind
Oh,
of
they've all been offered deals. They've all been
right.
offered deals, and they've said no, to my understanding. Now, one of the men was just granted a reassessment of bail. So he's going to have a bail hearing soon. I'm sorry, I can't remember the exact date, where they will re-examine the bail. If he gets out, it's hoped that that will cause a domino effect with the other accused. But once again, we don't know which each accused is said to have done or acted or said, well, he had a drink or not. We just don't know. We don't know the evidence. Now, Ezra Levant went to a hearing, I think last week, and it was almost hilarious, except it's sad. Ezra went and he tweeted exactly what was happening in court. And like 20 minutes later, he erased half his tweets because the judge had said something that, there's a publication ban on this. I mean, I speculate that's what happened, but it's not like Ezra Levant to tweet out 15 ongoing things about a trial that he's covering
Yeah.
and then have to erase 6 of them or 7 of them. But that's what happened. He did say one thing, though, at the end of that. He said that some of the evidence that he heard that he's not allowed to tell us, I forget his exact words, but it was just incredible BS.
Yeah. I don't
The,
doubt it.
the whole case was just garbage. But he said for one or two of the accused, there were some disturbing pieces of evidence. I forget exactly what he said. Disturbing pieces of evidence. Well, if you don't see it in context, I don't know. Um, if you don't see them in context, I don't know. We don't know what they've got. But if you're relying on a charge of conspiracy to bring down the government by murdering police officers with a bunch of guys that you never met before and you're on a suicide mission,
It doesn't even
it
make
better
sense.
it better be more than one guy sitting around with a beer and saying, I'd like to hang that bastard Trudeau or that
Whatever.
police officer or whatever it is. Okay. So if that's what the case is all about, and it looks like the intelligence information and Hategate and everything was all about that, it was all phony, fake. I don't doubt that the entire case is a house of cards. And I pray that these men should have been out on bail a long time ago. The
Mhm.
fact that they are still in jail is political, it's torture, and it's also a reminder to the rest of us that if you don't comply, if your political opponent will destroy you, your family, your wife, your children, your business, your farm, will make you sell the farm that's been in the family for 200 years. So you do what you're told. Make no mistake. That's what these type of cases are about. With Chris Barber and Tamara Leach,
Mhm.
how many weeks are we to a mischief charge? And they haven't
Yeah.
even, the judge, I think, is just getting so frustrated. She said, I think the prosecutor said something like, and there was this one big group and they were in charge of it. And the judge said something like, no, there was 18 separate groups at the Ottawa trucker protest. So everybody's getting the idea that this is political theater and it's being done as a warning to all Canadians. Yep.
Wow. Okay. I think we can cap it at that. Um, Donald, would you come back and talk to me about Detective Bruce? And I would also like to get your perspective on the Tamara Leach and Chris Barber trial, because that's, I feel like the Leach and Barber trial is kind of overshadowed and eclipsed this what we're calling the Coutts 4 situation. But I think there's a lot to dig into there, and there's a lot to talk about there, because you're right. They're currently, I think it's like day 28 or 29 or something like that in a mischief trial, and we haven't even heard the defense argument yet. It's all been
Insanity. Absolute
it's
insanity.
but again, it's what you said, it's political theater, right? Like what we're watching is a circus. The
Mhm.
problem is that these are real people with real lives. These four men who have been held in pretrial for nearly pretrial custody for nearly 2 years. And look, I can attest to pretrial to being in pretrial custody. I grew up in a gray area. I have a lot of friends who were on the opposite side of the law, and and being in BC, Surrey pretrial, those three words, Surrey pretrial, were shot fear into the hearts of everyone who heard it, because it was the worst possible place for you to end up. So I would imagine that these guys are in those conditions, sitting there for almost 2 years, waiting for a trial that really doesn't seem like there's any chance that one's going to show up, while the clock's ticking over their heads. And the truth is, because they've never been convicted, nor have they been absolved of these crimes that they're charged with. Once they're finally let out of jail, there's going to be no recourse for them. The federal government's not going to hand them $10 million and say, whoops, sorry. These guys are going to be left to pick up their lives and figure it out on their own. Now, as you said, we don't know all of the evidence. Everything that you and I are talking about is purely speculation. So there might be some horrific things in there that we don't know. But the problem is we don't know. And
I don't know, my friend. How horrific can it be? I just don't
right.
see it. I just
But
don't
as
see it.
But as outside
But
observers, all we can do is speculate.
yeah,
And based on those speculations, this whole thing just looks completely trumped up. And knowing who this federal government is, knowing the people who are running it, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, look at everything that we've seen over the course of the last 8 years. I mean, we've been through this for 8 years now, and it's just never ending. Every day, it's just a cascading wave of ethics violations and breaches of trust. It's
but
just
it doesn't
constant.
matter. It
Yeah,
doesn't matter.
yeah,
No,
yeah,
nobody ever pays any price.
yeah,
Nobody's held accountable.
yeah.
There's a law for us and a law for them.
That's right.
That's not rule of law. And I blame law enforcement.
Mhm,
I blame our elected members of parliament who bow the knee to wherever will give them money, whatever cause the boss tells them to support. It's almost like they take their integrity and their courage the moment they send them to Ottawa.
mhm.
Why is that?
Money.
Well, here we are.
Yeah, money, prestige, power. It's the same system that creates oligarchs in communist countries. I mean, Canada, we have watched ourselves descend to the status of a banana republic, where we're under the rule of a junior dictator and a band of oligarchs. I mean, you could look, and I'll cap what I want to say with this. Go back in time, everybody listening to this, please go back, read about the Soviet Union, read about Mao's China, and tell me what the difference is between the oligarchs that existed in those societies and the oligarchs that we have now. There is really no difference. And the only thing that's saving us, our only saving grace, is the internet, because we can still communicate. And as long as we can communicate, it keeps the walls of complete totalitarianism for closing in completely. But we're losing the internet. We're through these censorship bills that are being passed across all of the Western nations. We are slowly losing that ability to communicate. And trust me when I tell you, once we lose the ability to communicate and be heard, the anvil will drop. That's when it will drop.
Do not comply.
Exactly. So,
Do not comply. Yeah, you talked about the convoy and how that flame burns. I don't think that flame is going to come together in a convoy again. I don't think it can. We can't recreate that. But that flame to me says, no, I won't comply. You're not
mhm,
going to jab me with anything. You're not going to keep me from shopping at this store. I will not comply. If only 5% of us had stood up and said no. If only 5% of police officers, but it was only a handful,
mhm,
who refused to become tyrants.
mhm,
Each one of them, it was like a switch was flipped, and our police officers became an occupying army overnight.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't comply. Do not comply.
Let's leave it. Let's cap it on that. Donald, where can everybody find you?
DonaldBest.ca is my website, donaldbest.ca. And then my Twitter is at DonaldBestCA, at DonaldBestCA. And every morning, Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. Eastern Time, on The Levine Show, Jason Levine, The Levine Show. Find us on Rumble, it's a good place, and Twitter. You can find us there too.
Awesome. Okay. Well, Donald, hang around for a second after we stop recording here, and thanks so much for your time today. I've been following you for a while. I read your website. I read the things that you put out there, and I'm just so grateful that you're out there, and after everything you've been through personally in your own story, it's pretty magnificent that you're out there fighting like you are. So thank you, sir. Thank you for doing everything that you do.
Thanks, but there's many of us, and we're just going to keep on keeping on, aren't we?
Yeah, that's right.